By any measure of game console success, 8 years has to be a tremendous record. On the 22nd of November 2013, the Xbox One succeeded the Xbox 360 on its 8th birthday, but this was very much an outlier. Even in Nintendo's consoles, a case could be made that the Switch is their longest platform without a successor or competitor console emerging. The original Famicom debuted in Japan on the 15th of July 1983 and was succeeded by the Super Famicom in November 1990. At 7 years and 4 months, it was the longest running Nintendo home system, but of course, due to its staggered international releases, not all of the territories had such a long run. The Game Boy had 9.5 years before the Game Boy Color came along, a console which was arguably a variant rather than a new generation even then. However, there was the abortive attempt to launch the Virtual Boy in the middle of the era, and arguably the Game Boy only achieved the late rally that it did due to the abrupt demise of the Virtual Boy combined with the outsized success of the new game Pokemon. There is a school of thought, therefore, that the Switch is actually the console which has lasted the longest without any attempt at a successor muscling into its territory. It's always tempting to lean into the status quo bias and assume that what has been so far will continue to be the case in the future. It will be easy to feel confident that long generations are the new normal, and there are certain indications that this may be the case. The slow transition from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5 seems emblematic of a growing disillusionment with the race for graphical power, suggesting that there may be less momentum for future console offerings, and clearly for Nintendo, it is vastly in their favor to sweat an existing asset rather than try to roll the dice on a new system launch. All the signs are promising that they're going to get it right for the Switch 2, but it's still a huge and risky venture, and I rather suspect that there are swimming pools being sweat in Kyoto, Redmond, and Dusseldorf right now as they hope to get this launch perfect. But even if they pull it off, 8 years is a long time, and especially with rapid changes in technology and in the marketplace, nothing can be taken for granted going forward. It has to be more likely than not that the Switch will end up being a high watermark for Nintendo for quite a while to come. And here's the odd thing, it is possible, not overly likely perhaps, but certainly plausible, that the system could still be receiving new games in another 8 years. Think about the Wii. Just Dance 2020 launched on that console on the 5th of November 2019, while Retro City Rampage and Shakedown Hawaii launched in Europe on the Wii in 2020. The Wii waited 6 years before its successor came along, and yet new games were released 7 or 8 years after it purportedly shuffled off the stage. There are a few other examples, such as FIFA 2014 and Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, releasing on the PlayStation 2 just weeks before the PlayStation 4 was to drop. And of course, there were backward compatible Game Boy Color titles released over a decade after the original Game Boy's debut. And in many ways, it's now far easier to release games on the original Switch due to the successor's backwards compatibility, the form factor's strong reputation in the indie community, and the prevalence of downloadable games. Barring technical difficulties which might cause problems, it seems like it would be logical for most indie studios to make particularly pixel graphics or low graphics indie titles available on the Switch, as well as the Switch 2, scooping up the massive install base. It's difficult to say for sure how long it will continue to be advantageous for companies to do this, as there may come a time where the cost of testing to ensure compatibility outweighs the potential audience segment, but with so many people owning Nintendo Switches, that still seems like a long way off at the moment, especially for games with large potential audiences. The announcement of Pokemon Champions as a cross-platform game for not just the Switch family of systems, but also Android and Apple made me wonder whether this could be a standard for some years to come, especially in the Pokemon series, games designed for a broad swathe of older tech, which would include both older smart device models as well as the original Switch. And while I would anticipate that the major demand for this would probably not be first party, and I had been assuming that Nintendo wouldn't continue to release first party games past at latest about 2027, I'm now not so sure. I think that's true of retail titles, but I just can't see a point any time in the medium term where it won't be potentially beneficial for the Pokemon Company to at least make some version of their Pokemon spin off games available on the Legacy Switch. Sure, Nintendo may want to nudge people onto the next thing and may even pull support from their end, but the Pokemon Company are a separate entity and their concern will be their install base. And I think we can expect quite a large legacy install base to remain on the Switch for a long time, especially for Pokemon. So Nintendo could find themselves publishing these games if nothing else. I had assumed Kirby was the most likely title to bring up the rear in terms of first party late releases. As I covered in a recent video, so many recent consoles ended with a Kirby, including most recently Kirby's Epic Yarn on the 3DS in March of 2019. But considering these pressures, I now suspect that Pokemon is more likely to be responsible for Switch's last first party outing one day, potentially quite far into the future. Plus, we're not even considering here that the Switch may not even be done with original iterations. The new 2DS XL did not hit the market until after the Switch effectively superseded it as Nintendo's premier handheld. Now, in that case, arguably the Switch was still being touted as a replacement home console, and it was only with the advent of the Switch Lite that the company truly moved into the handheld space. Nevertheless, there are many ways Nintendo could continue to push the vintage Switch if they so wished. They have yet to do a price cut of any significance, although inflation has naturally eroded the console's value in the market over time. They may consider that the potential to do an extreme low-cost model is too tempting. Remember, the 3DS launched at $169 and then dropped to $129. Getting people onto an ecosystem like the Nintendo Switch is far better for Nintendo than just getting them onto a secondary handheld, as it familiarizes people with the system and makes the likelihood of future upgrades all the greater. Especially if the accessories are backward compatible, an ultra low cost model for young children or for people to have as a portable indie machine could be a very tempting proposition. All of which to say that while 8 seems like a huge milestone, and it is, and while the Switch 2 is just around the corner, I think we could be seeing the original Nintendo Switch in one form or another for a long time to come. Thank you as ever for watching, liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.